Lesson 15, Landmark Free Speech Cases, Part 2. Before we pick up with Terminello versus Chicago, 1949, let us review Schenck versus the United States in 1919. It was that case that established the clear and present danger doctrine. This is the test for determining when speech is protected and when it is not. Speech is not protected under the First Amendment when that speech or expression creates a clear and present danger of an evil that Congress has the right to prevent. By clear, we're meaning obvious, evident. By present, we're meaning at the moment, immediate. The danger created by the speech must be evident, must be clear, and it must be upon us. That danger will bring about an evil that Congress has a right to prevent. The main point about Schenck versus the United States was that speech is not uttered in a vacuum. Oliver Wendell Holmes, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, noted that the character of every act depends upon the circumstances in which it is spoken. The circumstances of Schenck's activity of mailing out the brochures, we were at war. The danger was clear. It was present. Had young men refused to be drafted, listened to Schenck's words, acted upon Schenck's words, then victory in the war might be at stake. Therefore, Schenck, his actions, his expression, was not protected under the First Amendment because of the clear and present danger his expression created. Now, Terminello versus Chicago. What is this case about? Arthur Terminello, a defraud Catholic priest, arrived in Chicago to deliver a speech. This was in 1946. He had been stripped of his priesthood, defrocked, because he had spreaded anti-Semitic and anti-African-American propaganda. He was clearly a bigot and a racist, and the Catholic Church was not going to tolerate such a person as a priest. Well, he arrived in Chicago at Veterans Hall, Christian Veterans Hall, which also was located in a very heavily Jewish neighborhood in 1946. Remember, World War II had just ended the previous year. Terminello denounced the Jews and communists and Democrats who were trying to destroy America. He praised Hitler. The communistic Jews were the problem, he said, and Hitler had the solution. Remember now, this is coming after tens of thousands of Americans had lost their lives to defeat Hitler. Millions of Jews had been slaughtered by the Nazi regime. He called the crowd outside slimy scum. There had been a big crowd that had gathered to protest his speech, and his words touched off a minor riot. The crowd outside threw rocks, bricks, ice picks, breaking 28 windows in the auditorium. A group of young men rushed the police. 19 were arrested, several were injured, and at one point, Terminello's life appeared to be in danger. Terminello was arrested and convicted because he had, quote, stirred people to anger, invited public dispute, and brought about a condition of unrest. He was fined $100 or so. This was a violation of the city ordinance in Chicago. His conviction was upheld in the Illinois state courts. His lawyers appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, saying that he had a First Amendment right to utter such words. William O. Douglas wrote the majority opinion for the Supreme Court, 1949. Only through free debate and free exchange of ideas that government remains responsible to the will of the people. A function of free speech is to invite dispute. It may serve its high purpose when it induces a condition of unrest, creates dissatisfactions, or even stirs people to angers. Speech is often provocative and challenging. That is why freedom of speech is protected against censorship or punishment, unless shown likely to produce a clear and present danger of a serious evil that rises far above public inconvenience, annoyance, or unrest. So the Supreme Court reversed Terminello's conviction. They ruled in favor of him. The key phrases here: speech is often provocative and challenging. It serves its high purpose when it induces a condition of unrest, and it can only be censored when it creates a clear and present danger of a serious evil. I want to stress the fact that Schenck versus the United States, the opinion talked about an evil that Congress has a right to prevent, a clear and present danger of an evil. Terminello now modifies it, qualifies it, a serious evil, a clear and present danger of a serious evil that rises far above public unrest or even rioting. A serious evil. The next case is a very famous case in the schools, Tinker versus Des Moines School District. We're in Iowa, 1968. Mary Beth and John Tinker. 1967, a number of students at this high school began to wear black armbands to protest the Vietnam War. Students were permitted to wear political emblems, pins, buttons of all kinds. One day, the principal announced that any student wearing an armband, though, would be asked to remove it or be suspended. After the announcement, Mary Beth Tinker, John Tinker, and friend Chris Eckert wore armbands to class. They caused no disturbance or disruption. They were asked to remove the armbands. They refused. They were suspended. Mary Beth's father filed a federal court suit with the help of the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. School authorities argued that, quote, there were appropriate times for us to mourn our war dead, that if they did not like the way our elected officials were handling things, it should be handled with the ballot box and not in the halls. of public schools. The district court dismissed Tinker's suit, so Mr. Tinker appealed the case to the Supreme Court. Notice they won. Again, the Tinkers lost in a lower court, the first level of appeal. The case is heard by the U.S. Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court overturned the lower court decision supporting Tinker from the majority opinion. The wearing of armbands is exactly the type of symbolic act that is within the free speech clause of the First Amendment. It can hardly be argued that either students or teachers shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. Very famous phrase. Neither students nor teachers shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate. Students and teachers still have constitutional rights when you are on a school campus. Not all of the Supreme Court justices agreed with the opinion. 2 justices dissented. It was a 7-2 vote. The court's ruling would create a situation where many students, quote, will be ready, able, and willing to defy their teachers on practically all orders. That was from a dissenting opinion. Hugo Black, who dissented, wrote, this decision is the beginning of a new revolutionary era of permissiveness in this country, fostered by the judiciary. John, Mary Beth, and Chris today, very famous. Students have rights in school. You do not lose them when you walk onto a campus. Our last case for this lesson is Texas versus Johnson. This is the flag burning case, 1989. We're in Dallas, Texas at the Republican National Convention. Outside the convention, a group of protesters marched through the streets to protest the policies of President Ronald Reagan. Republicans were renominating him to run for a second term. There were lots of speeches made, demonstrations. One demonstrator, Gregory Lee Johnson, unfurled a U.S. flag, doused it with kerosene, and set it on fire. While the flag burned, several protesters chanted, "America, the red, white, and blue, we spit on you." This is Gregory Lee Johnson right here. Several bystanders were offended. There was no violence or altercation taking place at the time of the demonstration. Johnson was convicted under a Texas penal code that prevented desecration of a venerated object such as the flag. He was sentenced to 1 year in prison and fined $2,000. The case is going to go through the Texas court system before the U.S. Supreme Court agrees to hear the case. And the court ruled in favor of Johnson that this was protected speech. And this is the very famous ruling. If there is a bedrock principle underlying the First Amendment, it is that government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because society finds the idea itself offensive or disagreeable. A bedrock principle underlying the First Amendment. Government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because society finds the idea itself offensive or disagreeable. So this case evoked an enormous response across the nation in protest of the Supreme Court decision. And we'll pick up with the end of this case in Lesson 16, but this concludes Lesson 15.